Hey, it's Huck. And um, look at my hair. I can see myself. This is terrible. I'm sorry uh, that once again I don't exactly get dressed up for you. Huck is here, and I just wanted to fill you in on the results of my hospital visit. I had a little scary moment there. I went into emergency, and I said I had a heart stress test scheduled, actually with a specialist here. Would have been coming up here on Wednesday, but it was more than a week away, and I was, continuing to have like some kind of like a little ache in my chest that wasn't ever going away. Like tightness or whatever, and because I had had this really severe incident of chest pain here a few weeks ago, and this nagging little ache ever since. I was stressing out over it, I guess, and I thought, you know what? I kept thinking of, my poor neighbor Ed, who had passed away in his sleep, and from a massive heart attack at the age of like 51 or 52 here last year. And I thought, this isn't worth it. I'm not. My doctor had urged me to go into emergency, and I keep worrying about money and, hospital bills and ambulance bills I'm still paying. And I thought, it's probably cheaper to go to the specialist and have this done than to go in the hospital. But I don't know. The stress alone was starting to bother me. So I went in. In their initial tests, they took some blood and an x-ray or I don't know. At any rate, everything was coming back, negative or good. Um, but they, but they decided they were going to admit me and have the specialist, the cardiologist, see me the next day and possibly schedule me for a stress test. Well, anyway, so they put me in a room. And, by, I think I checked myself in at around noon. And by 6 o'clock or so, they'd admitted me and I was in a room. And I had some freedom, they had me hooked up to kind of a monitor that everything is now portable. So they had a little thing about the size of my cell phone that all these wires, this ganglion of wires were hooked up to that just kind of sat in the front pocket here. So I was able to get up and walk around and just down the hallway a little bit, there was a place where I could make myself coffee. I'd never had that before in a hospital where you could go up and get your own coffee out of the coffee machine. And at any rate, then I got up to, to use the bathroom facility there in the room, use the little restroom there. And as I was walking, the 10 feet or so back to my bed, as I was about to crawl back into my bed, I had this massive, what felt like an angina attack. And I called the nurse, and this thing was, just about doubled me over with pain. And within a moment, they were handing me a nitroglycerin tablet, which I had never seen before. I'd heard of them. I've seen them in movies. But they gave me one and told me to put it under my tongue, which I did. And like within seconds, they were asking me, has it gone away? Are you feeling better? And the answer was, well, no. And so they gave me a second one. and I took that. And I don't know. It was feeling a little better, but it wasn't going away. And after the second one, I don't know, maybe a minute or so later, it did, excuse me, it did finally, ease up quite a bit. And but by this time, they had called what they call a chest pain alert. And before I knew it, there were like 5 doctors or residents or whatever that had come in and were surrounding my bed now. One of them was asking whether or not they should bring the cart, which I think they meant the crash cart, with the defibrillator or whatever. At any rate, so this was all rather alarming. And at any rate, so, nothing, further happened other than, they had a long discussion and discussed this and that. And finally, the next morning they did schedule me for their stress test, and at first they tried to put me on this. They tried to put me on a what do you call it? My mind just went to a blank. They had me, walk on one of those machines. Oh, that's embarrassing. I can't think of what the hell that word is. Well, at any rate, so I got on it, and they told me they were going to start slow and then, go faster until they got my heart to a certain beat. And I thought, well, and I told them, I says, well, I use these things at my pulmonary rehab facility, but I usually keep it at about 1 mile an hour. That seems to be about the pace where I can, stay on it more or less indefinitely and keep walking. If I get up to even like 1.3, 1.5, I start getting winded. And well, at any rate, so they said they were going to start slow. Well, whatever speed they considered slow was probably felt like twice as fast as what I was used to, and I kept up with it for about a minute, and finally I told them I was I was starting to get winded. Well, I was hunched over trying to catch my breath, and before I knew it, they had grabbed my IV and they shot me with this. They injected me with I don't know, whatever it is, the medication that they use to simulate exercise. In other words, to stimulate your heart. At any rate, the combination of being winded from the exercise and this sudden, rush of whatever it was, hit me like like a brick. And I told them, I said, I can't breathe. Well, I could breathe, but I was hyperventilating, and they were trying to calm me down, and they, finally got me to sit down. They were trying to. My instinct always is when I'm out of breath, and I think this is kind of natural for most people, is that you hunch over. You see people like after they've run a race, they hunch over and they hang their arms down, or they're holding on to their knees or whatever, and they're kind of hunched over. And that's actually, I guess, the opposite of what you should be doing if you're struggling to breathe. You should be laying back, sitting back, opening up your chest, because it does help you breathe. At least that's what they tell me. And yet it's like the exact opposite of what you want to do. Well, at any rate, I did catch my breath. And then the rest of the... now, of course, they had me hooked up to another ganglion of wires, and they were taking readings, I suppose. But the rest of the test is really a series of pictures that they take. About an hour or so, hour and a half after that treadmill exercise, and that was the word I was seeking, I went up to my room, and they brought me back down, and they put me under this scanner. I guess it was a CT scan, but it was a kind that they take a series of pictures as it slowly rotates, from on top, to your side, so that they can get different angles, of views of three-dimensional, views of your chest. And at any rate, so that test, those series of pictures, takes like 15 minutes while you're lying on your back on this thing, and they're taking those pictures. They also brought me back about 3.5 hours after that for another series of exactly the same thing. I forgot to mention that after I had that angina attack or whatever the previous evening, they had rushed me down and took a more traditional CAT scan, where they inject you with that radiation stuff, and you're under that thing that you see the lights swirling around like crazy. And so I had a bunch of CT scans. Both of these tests that I took downstairs, I know they gave me an injection. So I probably should be glowing by now. At any rate, when all was said and done, by that 5 o'clock or so, they came back with results. And I'll be honest with you, it was good and bad, or good and concerning. They really, as far as I could tell, they couldn't find anything. All of the test results, all of the scan results seemed to be negative for what they would normally be looking at. In addition to that, other than the smoking that I had previously done, I didn't have a lot of the risk factors, I guess, that they're looking for. My parents didn't really have heart problems. I don't know what all else. I don't have a history of high blood pressure. I don't have a history of, high cholesterol or any number of other things that I guess that they normally associate with a risk of, blockage or whatever. But at any rate, the tests were largely negative. I think as a precaution, though, they gave me what they told me were very low doses of a number of medications that I'm supposed to take for the next month or so. There aren't any refills on them, so I don't know that they expect me to continue these or not. But in addition to the prednisone that I have been taking for my lungs, and and the Symbicort, which is the inhaler that I take for my breathing, specifically for my heart, they gave me they want me to take a baby aspirin, which sometimes I do and usually I don't. Something called isosorbide. I don't know. Take one tablet by mouth daily at 8 a.m. Trying to think if there's another name that this goes by. Whatever it is. Metoprolol. It's something that metoprolol, one a day, or half a pill every 12 hours. And then another pill, which I guess is basically Lipitor, which I take once a day. It's a statin or whatever. And that's basically for, I think they try to get your cholesterol down or whatever. The metoprolol, I think, if I understand, the metoprolol is a medication that can kind of regulate your heart a little bit so it doesn't get too fast or too slow or whatever. But I think there's another reason for it. Anyway, all of these things are kind of precautions to try to help so you don't have, so your blood is a little thinner and, helps against clotting and that kind of thing. What was troubling about the exam, to be honest with you, and I'm a little concerned, is they found multiple nodules in my lung, what they call MPNs, or multiple pulmonary nodes or nodules. Now, I have tried to, this is why they tell you should never try to be a doctor and Google your, your diagnosis. When they gave me the test results, this was the first thing they pointed out, was that that this came up, and that they have instructions for me to get together for a follow-up with my lung doctor within the next 30 days. And of course, I called my lung doctor's office the very next day, the first day I got home. She's been out of town. I think she's still out of town. They've scheduled me for an appointment April 23rd. And I says, you do realize that this could possibly, potentially signify, cancer. And they said, well, when she comes back to the office, I think this coming week here, she will have access to the records and the scans and the report, and she will look that over. And if she feels the need to see me any sooner, she will call and try to fit me in sooner. So at this point, I guess I'm going to leave it at that. At any rate, I read the report. It states that there are several. It doesn't mention a number. They're all very small. The largest nodule in the left lung is like 5.1 millimeters. And it's there's some other discussion of the condition of my lungs, which is probably not good. Typical, I would think, of a person who smoked for many years, though. At any rate, It also said that they should regard these things for further imaging or assessment according to the Fleischner Society protocol. And so, of course, I looked that up. Anyway, what I arrived at were like some conflicting um, tidbits of information that leaves me kind of wondering what the heck I'm dealing with here. On the one hand, I was told that these little nodule type things, or MPNs in general, are found in approximately 50% of all smokers, and that in less than 1% of cases are they necessarily malignant, particularly if they are very small, which mine are. And this kind of hints at what the Fleischner Society scale or protocol suggests is that I guess it used to be general practice that if they found these kind of nodes or nodes in your lungs, if they were 4 millimeters in size or more, they would generally call for another more intensive CT scan. And I guess more or less recently, in recent years, they've changed that. The Fleischner Society protocol basically suggests that if they're under 6 millimeters, you probably don't want to do more radioactive scans, simply because the radioactive scans are dangerous and cancer causing in and of themselves. And you may be doing more danger with the additional imaging than the 1% chance or less that these nodules themselves represent. On the other hand, there's a description of the general condition of my lungs, and the word glass ground something in a portion of my lungs. And I don't think they're talking about the nodules themselves, but the portion area of my lungs. That word was there. And so I was reading an assessment where if the density of these particular nodules, if they're glass ground, whatever, much more likelihood of being malignant tumors. So at any rate, all of this is stressing me out. I mean, needless to say, my mom eventually died of lung cancer. They found a nodule in her lung. I think it was a lot bigger. She lived about a year. We chose not to have treatment for her because of her otherwise really frail condition, and even the doctors recommended that she probably wouldn't live through the treatment. My dad had a different form of lung cancer, a much faster acting cancer called small cell lung cancer. By the time they diagnosed him with it, small cell lung cancer, the average person lives about 12 weeks, with small cell lung cancer if treatment's not successful. And it's a very aggressive, very fast acting lung cancer. And while they say it's small cell lung cancer is more more treatable as far as treatment process is more effective against it. It is so fast and so aggressive. It's still, at any rate, 84% of the time lung cancer is not curable. I think that's it's like the third most fatal cancer. I think pancreatic cancer might be number one. Don't quote me on any of this, but I think that's anywhere something like around less than 84% of lung cancer patients live outside of 5 year window once diagnosed. And like I say, for small cell cancer victims, the window's on average about 12 weeks. My dad lived about 7, and the last few were not pleasant. Um, so I'm pretty concerned. I don't know. I'm hoping that. Now I've read, like I say, some other things, like for instance, that these nodes or these spots or whatever are often, in some cases, just remnants of previous infections. And Lord knows I have had lots of lung infections. I've had, I were having, as you know, if you've been following my channels, I was having exacerbations of my lungs repeatedly. Now, I've been away from cigarette smoking for, some time now. And I have been doing a lot better. I've had, very few, if any, of these real lung infections in the last almost a year, well, since last June. So that's all good. So I'm hoping that these are nothing serious, that they're just benign little things that, have accumulated over time. There are, I think the last CAT scan that I think that I've taken that maybe they can compare this to was way back in September of like 2014 or 2015 when I was hospitalized with double pneumonia. And so, possibly they can compare. But I know it was really after that I started having all these, significant exacerbations. So I don't know if that's going to be a fair analysis. I'm hoping that my doctor is going to take a look at these scans and determine that there's nothing serious to deal with. Obviously, if there is something serious, I'm going to have to debate what I'm going to do about it. And my instinct is to probably say, well, we're going to fight this as aggressively as possible and, and roll the dice. But like I say, I have no reason to be overly cautious at this moment. I am eager to see my doctor as quickly as possible. So I'm hoping I don't have to wait until April 23rd. If for no other reason than I want to have, I want to know. I want to get this over with and get, I don't want to stress about it for another month, not knowing. That all said, so like I said, it was kind of good news and, I don't know what to make of the other. So it could end up being all good news. So, there's that. The other thing I wanted to mention on a different note, and what my channel is really all about, is politics. Now, I want to say that I am very grateful, as always, for the continued help that I have been receiving. I would never have even considered probably even going to the hospital were I not in the position to say, well, I'm almost, I'm staying current with my bills, and I'm able to pay a little bit extra on some to try to pay some down. And, and I am making progress in all of that. And it's only because I've been helped so much. I've got this car now that's reliable. And as a means of making sure that I can try to pay off some of these medical bills sooner, I went ahead and I sold my other car, my Sonata. I got a few $100s for it. And, I was honest about it, there being a transmission problem, but it seems to be drivable, at least not at highway speeds. And the person came to buy it for a few $100s and knew exactly what he was getting. And said it doesn't matter, if you can get him through a month or so of getting back and forth to work, you'll be happy. The truth is, you can pretty much get maybe just a little less than I sold him the car for at the boneyard, if it comes to. So he's not going to lose much money on the deal. But I'm going to be able to apply that now to whatever these hospital bills are, and that will help. But I wanted to mention that I took the extraordinary step of contributing $10 to a political candidate this month. And it's hard for me to do that. It's hard for me to justify that because I am, living on borrowed money for, or gifted money for a large part. But I'm mindful too that that we have a humongous candidate field shaping up for 2020, and I haven't determined who I'm ultimately really pulling for. I'm open to many of them, and be honest with you, if it comes down to it, one of these candidates versus Trump, I don't think there's a single Democrat that's running that I wouldn't work feverishly to elect, whoever it is among them. But, like anybody else, I have my preferences. And at this point, I really am in a evaluation mode. But what is important at this point in time, in fact, today, the 31st of March, is the end of I think the first FEC deadline for fundraising. And I'm reminded of that because a number of these candidates, and I'm not sure how they all are getting my email address, but I'm reminded almost daily, as they're sending me notices of the upcoming FEC deadline, and won't I please donate even a few dollars? Here's my take on that. It used to be that they determined, who were, in a large field like this, who was going to show up on the debate stage, largely by poll numbers. And if you remember in 2016, there was frankly, a rather large pool of Republican candidates, many of whom couldn't get on the debate stage, or at least on the main debate stage, simply because they were polling so low. And with a crowded field and people like Biden and maybe Bernie Sanders and Beto O'Rourke, I think those are the three front runners. I think Biden is slightly ahead of Sanders right now. I think Beto O'Rourke and maybe Kamala Harris are all polling at above, 5 or 6%. And then everybody else. I think one of the candidates that's suddenly showing up on a lot of polls, particularly in Iowa, where he's put in a lot of time, is the Democratic mayor of South Bend, Indiana, the home of Notre Dame University. And I think his name is Buttigieg. Anyway, he's the first openly gay major party candidate for president, but he's not really using that as a main platform for his run. And apparently, people are pretty impressed with him. I've seen him a little bit, but I didn't see his. I guess he appeared on a CNN town hall, and I guess he appeared on Morning Joe on MSNBC one morning, the next morning. And so, anyway, he's getting a lot of attention and a lot of positive reviews right now. I have seen him on a few little news clips or whatever, and I'm intrigued, but I wouldn't put him right now, anywhere near the top of my list. I donated $10 to Elizabeth Warren, simply because, as I've explained before, I don't think she's the most likely person to emerge from this field. I think her unfavorable numbers are pretty high. I think all of the females in the field, when it comes down to it, are going to run some hurdles, unfortunately. And that's going to be true of Kamala Harris and Amy Klobuchar, as well as Elizabeth Warren. And I think Kirsten Gillibrand of New York is right now really scrambling to, to get some notice. I saw her with on the Chris Hayes show, and like I said, I think all of these candidates have something to speak for them, and they're all head and shoulders clearly above any GOP candidate you can possibly imagine. It goes without question that would be true against Trump. But so this is my advice. It is this year, rather than going by poll numbers, they're going to go by contributions, and not by the total dollar amount, but by the number of individual contributors. Now, what that means is that if you have an interest in hearing a little bit more about what any particular candidate may have to say, even if at this point in time you don't know who you really like or who you're really going to ultimately vote for, if there's a candidate or candidates out there that you're intrigued, though, and you would like to know a little bit more about, well, the easiest way to assure that they're going to get on a debate stage where maybe you have a chance to learn more about them would be to simply donate a couple of dollars or even $1 to their campaign, because every contribution, regardless of how small, is going to earn them a better shot at being included. So that would be my advice. Anyone that you want to hear a little bit more about or know a little bit more about, so make $1 or $2 contribution. Go to their website. So that's what I did for Elizabeth Warren. Right now, I like what I'm hearing from her in most cases. I don't know that there's any candidate running that I would agree with 100% of the time. And, and I think they're all going to have things that are going to be pro and con. They're all going to have, and there's different ways of, weighing who you like and who you don't like and why. And it might just come down to, well, what's my number one priority, and who's the most effective, who's likely to be the most effective champion for that, whether it be, guns or income inequality or jobs or, healthcare, whatever your, number one issue is. Personally, I believe that people can walk and chew gum at the same time.